In this video, we're going to be learning about the WatchKit interface image. So we're going to be learning how to get images into our app, how to load them in our interface, how to get them to do neat things like animate, and more. So let's go ahead and let's jump right in here. So first of all, we need to understand how to get images into our app. Now there's a couple ways to do it, but the way that we're going to do it is kind of the standard way recommended by Apple, which is to store it as part of our app bundle. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's open up our navigation panel here. So we could basically put the images in our iOS app, right? So keeping in mind, if we have a simulator here, this is like a phone in the background, and we could stream images from the phone into the watch. But that's not really efficient. That could be slow. So we can actually just store the images directly on our WatchKit app. And we can do that in our assets folder here. And if you've never seen this, you've never looked at this before, take a look at it. So as you can see, I'm in my first WatchKit app. And so this is our storyboard. And this is where, if I open up our code, we don't have anything there now, but this is where we've been doing our code in the previous examples, right? So just our standard WatchKit app. We could also put it in the extension, but that's not really the best way to do it. That's really where you'd want to put things like downloaded images. So for our standard app images, we're going to want to put them in the assets.xc assets folder. So this is basically a library of images. As you can see, there's already a folder here called app icon, but they're all empty. So you can probably imagine what this is for. This is where you're going to put your app's icons. And as you can see, there's different categories. So for example, Apple Watch Notification Center. And it gives you two options because there's two different versions of the watch, right? There's 38mm and the 42mm version. Apple would recommend to use basically the same image for both. Just make sure that it's usable for both. There's also things like Apple Watch Companion, home screen, short look. So this is where you're going to put the, your brand images, whatever you want to display as a notification, for example. You can also bring in more images, and then you can use those in your interface.storyboard. You can set them using the objects library and then declaring the name of the file. You can also set them programmatically, which we're going to be exploring both ways of doing it. So let's go back to our interface.storyboard. And let's just kind of take a look here if we were to bring in an image object. So let's search for it here. Image. Okay, we see it is definitely in the library. And as you can see, it says image object displays a static or animated image. Right? So animated images are actually pretty easy to do as well in WatchKit. But first, let's bring this in, and we'll kind of explore some of the attributes here. So I'm in the attributes inspector, and we can see that there's a couple options. So you know what, in order to kind of play around with this, let's bring in our images, and then we'll come back here and take a look at it. So first of all, I'm just going to bring in one image. And I'm just going to open up my Finder here. You can see I have a couple images ready to go. I have an empty star.png and a filled star.png. And you should, for the most part, be using a PNG or a JPEG file. It is possible to use other file formats, but that might hinder performance. So Apple's going to recommend using the PNG and JPEG files. So let's go ahead, and I'm just going to bring in one of these files here. So if I click and drag it like so, you see it just creates a new kind of entry here with the image. And it automatically kind of drops off the extension. So .png drops off. So it's smart enough to understand to do that. Now also here, you might notice there's 1x, 2x, and 3x. Now what does that stand for? Well, this is basically for the different types of display. So if you're using a Retina screen, for example, which all Apple Watches are, you want to use a 2x version of that. So for most of our Apple Watch images, we're going to want to make sure we specify that it's 2x. 3x is for things that have a very high resolution, for example, iPhone 6 or 7 or the newer iPads. 1x is for non-Retina screen devices. So because we're going to assume our images are only going to be shown on an Apple Watch, we want to make sure we set them to 2x. And for your actual images, you want to make sure that they are high resolution so that they look okay on these high resolution screens. So just let me get rid of this here. Oops, I accidentally made a copy of it. Let me get rid of this, and I'll show you the naming convention that Apple recommends. So instead of just filled star.png, I'm going to rename it at 2x.png. So you notice before when I brought it in, it defaulted it to 1x. that's what it does if you don't have this kind of at 2x designation. So following these naming conventions now, if I bring it in, you see that it automatically puts it in at 2x. So just try to remember to follow those naming conventions, and then you see it is still smart enough to remove the at 2x plus .png. So this is going to be a bit of a time server. You don't have to come in and manually switch it to 2x every time if you just name it at 2x.png. Okay, so now we have an image that we can play around with. Let's go back to our interface storyboard here. I'm going to get rid of this side panel. So now if we look at our image, there's different ways that we can kind of get our image to display. The first way we're going to go over is the attributes inspector way. So you can see you can put in the name of an image, and if I drop down, it's going to show me all my images in my asset library that are available to do here. Now, I only have one image, so I can just tell it to use that image, and it brings it in. It doesn't look fantastic because it's not super high resolution, but you can imagine if you're using a high-res image, it's probably going to look a bit better. So now if I go to the image, there's a whole bunch of different options that I can play around with here. We also have modes that we can play with, and what mode does, it basically affects how the image fills in the available space. So some modes will basically let you scale the image without touching the aspect ratio. Others will let you position it relative to a fixed point. So the best way to play around with it is just to play around with these. But first of all, I'm just going to adjust the size and the height. Then we'll come back and take a look at mode. So as you can see, width and height, it just says size to fit content. But you can actually just, adjust these however you see fit. So if you do a fixed height, for example, or fixed width, let's make it, I don't know, 50. And we'll do the same for height. And keeping in mind, this will affect your aspect ratio, so you're going to have to keep that in mind. But if we do 50 for both, right, because it's a square image, it's going to maintain the aspect ratio when we do that. And now, if we play around with our mode, let's see what it does. So we say aspect fit, center. Right? So now it's centering the image, and it looks a little weird. So what if we do bottom? If we do top? Right, it's just kind of redefining what our image looks like. Because there's more space available that we're not taking up, we can kind of play with the mode here. And we can position it. So for example, top right looks like that. Bottom right looks like that. And yeah, it's just a way of kind of changing what it looks like. I'm just going to reset it though to scale to fill. And then tint, we can see here, tint is really only for template images. So if I try to change it, it's not going to really do anything. And what I mean by that is if, for example, we come back into our assets and we take a look at this using our attributes inspector, we can see here that we're rendering it as default. We could render it as a template image instead though. And now we'll be able to set the tint. So for example, set the tint like so. And that would set the tint. And let's, you know what, while we're here, let's run this in our simulator. Just kind of take a look at what it looks like right now. Okay, so we'll wait for that to build up. So once simulator loads, you see that it is tinted. So not exactly the appearance we want. So I'm going to switch it back to be a non-template image. But if you're wondering why your tint wasn't working, it's because it's only for template images. Okay, so let's go back to our storyboard. And I'm just going to reset this to default. Okay, animate, you can use this to easily animate your images. In our case, we only have one image. And the way animation works, it basically goes through the frames of an image. So if you're not sure what that means, if you think about, for example, an animated GIF file, so an image that kind of loops over and over again, basically that's just a file that has a bunch of different frames that it cycles through. That's what an animation looks like. And we can easily do that actually in our WatchKit app. But you need to have kind of frames in order for it to cycle through. Right now we only have one image. So if we say animate yes, we can do it, but it's not going to animate anything because we don't have any other frames for it to switch to. So we'll come back and take a look at that in a second. Otherwise, we have kind of our standard options here. So for example, horizontal center, vertical center, right? We can center it. And we've already seen what our size can do. Then from here again, we could play with the mode if we wanted to. So, we'll center it and that kind of scales it like so. So basically, yeah, just play around with these and see what works for you. I'm just going to reset it though to scale to fill. And let's just quickly load this up in the simulator just to make sure that it's working and it's displaying our image and what it would look like on the actual watch. Right, that's a big part of building out the software, is doing it incrementally. So we'll wait for that to load up and then we'll take a look at it. Okay, so simple little image, and that is the basics in terms of getting an image and manipulating it here with our attributes inspector. Now let's take another look at how to do a really simple animation. So let's say we have an animation with just 2 frames. We want to cycle back between the empty star and the full star. Well, that's pretty straightforward. So what I'm going to do is I am going to go into my images here, and I'm going to erase this filled star image, and I'm going to put in the empty star along with the filled star. So I'm going to make sure I name this according to the naming conventions, 2x.png. And the way we can tell WatchKit that we want it to animate is we just give it kind of a number designation like so. So I'm just going to rename both of these. So this one will be star 0, and this one will have to have the same prefix. So this one will also be star, but this will be star 1.png. And when you have a numbering scheme like this, it understands that you want to use this as separate frames in an animation, which is pretty neat actually. So if I grab both of these, bring it in here, okay, so now we see that they both have their own asset associated with it. And if we tell our interface storyboard here, so let me erase what we have here, and I'll bring in another image object. And let's set the image name using our attributes inspector here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to name it star without the number designation. And then we will just kind of leave it scale to fill, and we're going to say animate yes. And now it drops down a couple other options. And as you can see, it just automatically ticks off animate on load. We don't have to animate on load, but it is an option. So if we want to just be cycling through our star, we can do that. Otherwise, we can just do it programmatically. So for example, we may put a button in here. When the user taps the button, it just kind of cycles through the image. Let's also set a duration. So let's say, I don't know, 2 seconds. And this obviously will be the duration of the animation. So let's try it out. So right now it doesn't really display it because we didn't name the exact file. But you know what? If we run in the simulator, let's just see what it looks like. Okay, so there, build succeeded. We'll take a look at it here once it loads up. There we go. Okay, and you can see that it's cycling between the 2 images. So it takes 2 seconds and it just cycles star 0, star 1, back to star 0. Right, so it's kind of neat to be able to do that. It makes it pretty easy. You just have to put in each individual frame. It would be nice if we could put an animated GIF automatically, but that's a lot more difficult to do. So if we want just a simple animation, it's easiest just to do it as PNG files. You could also do JPEGs, but we're using PNG in our example. All right, so we'll just kind of leave that going in the background, and that is it really for really basic images. Next, let's take a look at how to load this image programmatically. So instead of giving it a name here, we're going to bring it in just as an empty image object. So I'm going to erase this. I'm going to bring in another image object. And what we'll do is we'll open up our assistant editor. And this will be similar to, say, setting a label programmatically. Not too different, really. So first of all, I will just grab it here, control click, bring it over as an outlet. So my image is what I'll name it. And yep, it's a WK interface image, you see, and we'll just do that like so. And as usual, it uses our outlet builder, or our interface builder. So interface builder outlet variable, my image, is a type of WK interface image. And now when we call func awake, we will configure our interface object. So we can say my image dot, and there's a whole bunch of methods available to us, right? You can see what we're going to be looking at here is set image data, or set image name. So let's start. We'll do set image named, and image name, well, it takes a string. So what is our image name? Well, we have, let's see, star 0 is a good image name. And, oh, it doesn't like image name there. So, okay, so that's extraneous. All right, so when we say star 0, this should understand we want to set that image. And as usual, run our simulator. And, obviously you would need to know the name of your image, but you just have to kind of look in your assets library to find out what your image name is. And this one is pretty self-explanatory, right? It's a star. There we see that it loaded up as expected. And as you can imagine, this would be pretty useful. So let's say you don't want to set an image until someone taps somewhere on the screen or hits something. Right? It's going to be useful for us to do this programmatically, like it was useful for us to set labels programmatically, or timers, all sorts of things. Okay, so that's how we can do it programmatically. Let's, just for practice, let's add a button that displays the image when it's clicked on. So grab a button here, bring it in. Okay, and we will just associate an action with this button. So I'm going to control click, bring it over, make it an action. My button. Actually, we'll say, yeah, button was tapped. Okay, and then when the button was tapped, then we will get the image to display. Okay, let's try it out. Let's see if it works. And run that in the simulator. Give it to our side panel here as well. Okay, should be any second now. All right, so we'll tap the button, and hey, there we go. So it kind of popped down, so we could kind of fix that if we wanted to, but you know what? It has the behavior we expected, and that's great. We could also kind of play with it to swap the images, for example. So if we declare a variable up here, swapped equals false, and then we will get it to display just by default this, like so. And we can say if, actually no, we'll say swapped equals the opposite of swapped. And then we'll say, we've seen this many times before, but if swapped, my image dot set image named star 1, like so, else my image dot set image named star 0. It's basically resetting it. Okay, and then this is how, if you wanted to swap between two different images, or however many images you wanted to do, you just have to kind of figure out the logic, like pretty much anything else we do. And let's just do a sanity check to make sure it works. Yep, there we go. Pretty neat. Next, let's figure out how we can get our images to animate programmatically. So let's say when we tap this button, instead of swapping, we're going to actually start an animation. So how can we do that? Well, it's pretty straightforward, really. So first of all, I'm going to get rid of my function here where I swap between the two. That was just a really simple example, and I'm going to get rid of this variable. Then we'll set the image, and we'll just declare it as star. And then when the button is tapped, we will start the animation. So we can say my image dot start animating. It's a pretty neat. We can just say start animating. This, I suspect, will be animating really fast, but let's see what it looks like. So it's going to know if we just say start at star 0. And then once we hit start animating, it's going to swap between star 0 and star 1. So let's see. Here we go. Yeah, there it goes. It's animating really quickly, but it is animating, right? So this kind of shows you that it's very easy to do this, even programmatically. Now let's look at our attributes inspector here to see if we can adjust that behavior. So we can say animate yes. We can also turn off animate on load, maybe increase the duration here to 3 seconds. let's see if that solves our fast cycling issue here. Okay, we'll let that load. And hopefully it won't just be immediately swapping back and forth there. But we'll hit the button, and it's loading every 3 seconds. Right, so a lot more reasonable now. And it just kind of shows you kind of have to play around with both the interface builder and also kind of the code in the background sometimes. And animating multiple images is just as easy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add to my assets library here. So right now I have star1, star0, and what I'll do is I'll bring in an entire folder. So let's go with arrows here. So I'm just going to click and drag this in. And before I do that, I'll just take a look at it here. Yeah, frame1.png. You know what? I'm going to add the @2x onto each of these so that it knows to put them as 2x. And then I'm going to import them. So we'll do rename @2x. Okay, I'll do the same for the rest of them here. Okay, so I've renamed each of them, and now I can just bring in the folder like so. So when I click and drag it, it just adds it in as a folder. So even though it's within a folder, we still have direct access to these names. So if I go back to my storyboard, you know, if I wanted to set this manually, if you notice now when I drop down, it has all my options. So, you know, it's a good idea to group things together under a folder because we still have access to it, and it just makes more sense logically. If you're going in, if you have like a lot of assets, it's going to make sense to have it in a folder. So let's go to our assistant editor here. And instead of set image star, let's set it to the new one we have here. All right, so we'll get rid of this. And let's see, frame is what it was called. So we have frame 1 through 8. And then if we just change the name there and we say start animating, right, it should be very easy just to swap out those images as well. And you can imagine how you could do this as well. So let's say you have a button that says switch what image I'm animating. Well, then you can just do it programmatically. So from set image named one thing to set image named another. Okay, let's try it out. So this, even though it has a lot more frames, it should be animating. Yep, and there it goes. And then it just keeps going. Pretty neat. What if we wanted to stop it? Well, that's pretty easy. You know what, so I'm going to name this button start. Start. We'll bring in another button to stop it. And you can probably imagine what that code is going to look like. It's not too different. Let's see. So this one will be stop. And we'll bring it in as an action. Button was tapped. No, we'll say stop button was tapped. Stop button was tapped. Whoops, I made it an outlet. Let me undo that. Get rid of this. We'll do an action. Action. Stop button was tapped. Right, and then we just need to say my image dot, you guessed it, stop animating. Okay, let's test it out. And then it's just going to basically reset it to frame 0. So it's not going to be super smooth, but if we want it to stop animating, that is a simple way to do it. Okay, and hopefully this will load in a second. There it goes. So start, and let's stop. And it might be hard to notice, but it reset it to its initial position. So we'll notice the arrow here, and then I hit stop, and it just resets it. Right, so we are just doing it manually, but you could do it in different ways, but that's how you can start and stop animations. Pretty straightforward. Right? And if you have an animation with, you know, 100 frames or more, it would basically be the same procedure. Set up a way to animate our images, and we kind of used our interface builder over here with our attributes inspector. And you might be wondering, is there not a way that I can start the animation and set it programmatically? Well, good news, yes, there is. So you know, I'm just going to say animate no here. We're going to do it programmatically instead. So here where we say set image named frame, that's not going to change. But instead of just calling start animating, we can call something that's a little bit more complex, and we can pass it how to animate basically. And this is going to be pretty useful for us. So what we can say is my image dot start animating with images. Right, so this is a method available on WK interface image, and you can see it takes an NS range, duration, and a repeat count. So we'll just kind of autocomplete that. And NS range, if you're not familiar with what that is, it's basically a data type that's used to describe an interval of integers. So you give it an integer to start with, you give an integer to end with, and that's a range. So for example, we're going to have it represent 0 through 8. So the range will be 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way to 8, including all the numbers. So it's basically telling it what frames to kind of cycle through. So what we can say is, okay, so this is an NS range, and then it takes location, which is basically where you start the range. We'll say location 0. Length, where do we end the range? 8, because we have 8 frames. Duration, this is a time interval. So you know what, let's put it at 1.0. Okay, so this is a 1 second duration, so it's going to take 1 second to completely cycle through. And repeat count, well, let's have it repeat indefinitely. So to do that, you just need to put a -1, and this will allow it to repeat indefinitely. Otherwise, we can just have it repeat once, for example. So again, something we can do programmatically is just have it do the cycle once. So let's run it here, and let's make sure that it is working. All right, so there it goes. Here we go. Okay, so it's not animating. I'm going to hit start, and there it goes. So it's cycling through using our NS range because we called start animating with images. Now we can call stop animating, and it'll still work, and we can start it again. Right, so stop, start, and that's pretty convenient. What if we made the duration, let's see, 0.5? It's just a time interval, and we want it to repeat 3 times, for example. Well, you can probably imagine what this is going to look like. So let's load that up. There it goes. Okay. And let's start it. Right, so you see it's quite a bit faster now. And it went 3 times, right? 1, 2, 3. Kind of hard to tell, but it did go through 3 times. And that's how we can do that programmatically. Pretty neat, right? Now let's try something else. Let's get rid of our stop button here, and we'll actually change it. So we'll say increase or speed up. Yeah, speed up. Speed up. And what this will do is this will increase the duration. So let's pass this in as a variable instead. So we'll say var speed equals, we'll start it at 3.0. So then we can just pass it in here. Speed, and we'll make sure we give it a type here, time interval. All right. And then when the quote unquote stop button was tapped, we will basically have it speed up. So we'll say speed plus equals 1. Okay. And we will also kind of rerun this function so that it restarts it with the new speed. All right, let's see how this works. Oh, actually, this will slow it down because we're increasing it by 1. But you know what? The logic is still applies. So we'll see what it does, though. Okay, it should get slower. That's what I think it should do. Okay, so it goes pretty slow. Let's speed it up. Okay, it's going to go even slower. This one even slower. Yeah, now it's really sluggish. So let's change it here. We'll do minus equals. And then we should make it go pretty fast. And we'll see what happens if it starts to go negative. But we'll see. Okay, start. Speed up. Speed up. Okay, so now it's 0. What if we do it again? Oh, interesting. It goes backwards. Okay, that is pretty neat. And so, no, we can actually shorten how we are defining our NS range as well. If we use kind of the shortcut NS make range, and you can see it just takes basically integers here. So location 0, right, length, speed, or no, length 8. We already have speed defined. Right? This will achieve the same thing, and that is how we can animate it programmatically. Right? And then let's just reset this to be -1 so that it just keeps repeating. And we'll reconfigure our range here as well to be the shorthand version. NS make range 0, 8. Again, we're kind of repeating ourselves here, so we can probably refactor this later. But for now, it's going to achieve our initial goal. All right, cool. Let's wait for that to load up here just to be sure. All right, here goes. Pretty slow. Speed it up. A little faster. Even more. All right, and this is probably speed 0. So if we go backwards, yeah. All right, that's pretty cool. Another thing we can do is we can set images to be a background. So for example, if we have a group with an image as the background, then we can have some kind of layering effect going on. So let's do that. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add in a group object into our interface. So we'll do that like so, group. Okay, so let me make this a bigger size here, see if I can do that. It's not letting me down below. But should be able to do so like so. Okay, so there's our group. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move our image to be inside the group like so. And our start and speed up buttons will also be in the group. So let's change the layout to be vertical. Start will be there. Okay, so now we have our group and things inside of it. And so far this should not really have affected the appearance. Let's make sure though before we move on, just so that it looks okay still. Okay, let's move this up so it's not on top of the static interface down below. Okay, so you can see it still works the same, except that now there's a group here. Now let's go ahead and let's put in a different image. So what I want is I want kind of a circular animation around the entire group. And how can we do that? Well, first of all, let's kind of reconfigure some of our code here. And I'm going to get rid of my speed up button. So I'm going to get rid of that. And yeah, so we'll leave the speed time interval as is. Actually, no, we'll set it to 1 so that it's pretty snappy. All right, now let's change our image that we're displaying here. And what I'm going to be displaying here is basically a circle. So let's take a look at the frames here. So I have this folder circle, and you can see that there's actually 100 frames. So there's quite a lot of frames. And it's just kind of a circle that gradually completes. Right? So kind of a nice design aspect that we can have. So we could use this, for example, if the user taps a button and then we need to load something, we could kind of use this, set the time interval for whatever we need it to be. And I generated this on a really handy website, actually. So this GitHub user, Hitesh Dasani, so he has this site, and you can kind of have it figure out, your circle arc, whatever you want it to look like, and you can kind of customize it. It's pretty useful. So, so this site allowed me to generate the image, and I just specified, okay, no text in there. And then I told it to generate 100 frames, basically. So this is what I'm using for my image here. And so that's going to be pretty useful. So let's go ahead and let's bring in the panel here, go to our image assets. So, you know what, I can leave the assets I have there, but I'm also going to bring in my circle here. So click and drag that over. Okay, it might take a second. And also, when it comes to images, you do want to take care not to have too much in terms of size, because there's about a 50 megabyte limit for the size of your app in general. So if your images are taking up too much space, you won't be able to put it up on the App Store. So just be aware of that. All right, so let's go ahead and change what image we are using here. So we will go to our assistant editor, take out the side panel there, and okay, now we just need to set it as the background image for the group. So I'm going to delete this, which means I'm going to get rid of this and my outlet as well. And instead, I'm going to grab the group object. And you know what, I'm going to put this start button in the center while I'm at it. So horizontal center, vertical center. Okay, so now inside of its container, it's centered. Now, let's go ahead and let's grab our group, control click, bring it in as an outlet. Call it my group. Okay, so now my group, we can set the background like so. My group dot set background image, and you can see set background image named, and it takes an image name as a string. Named, and my new images I just brought in are called single, basically 0 through 100. And now set background image is going to have the background, and we can also animate it. So my group we can also call start animating with images. Right, so just to show you that it does have that in autocomplete, my group dot start animating with images. Right, and it's essentially the same as we were doing before. Right, the only difference is we're calling it on a group now instead of an individual image. And that's pretty neat. So basically, we also want to make sure we pass it in the correct range. So we don't want 0 to 8. We have 100 frames. So we want to go 0 to 100. And this is just going to repeat over and over. Now, let's try it out. Let's see if it actually works as intended. And basically, the images I brought in, they are formulated to take up the entire width and height of the watch face. So that's pretty convenient for us, good for practicing. Okay, so I'm going to load this up. We'll hit start, and fingers crossed, it'll go. Cool. So that's pretty nice little design, right? Not too difficult. And instead of just setting it as an image, we set it as a background image. Now, we could also change it so that it only just repeats once, which is probably more what you would want with this type of display. And we could also make it maybe a little bit slower. So you know what, let's do 3.0 like we originally had. And we'll try it out here to make sure it works. Okay, give it a second here. But this is a way we can use our images. So keeping in mind images, in terms of animations, they're just individual images that cycle through. And yeah, there we go. Pretty cool. And then once it reaches the end, it doesn't repeat, and it stays in its final state at range 100. Let's say for whatever reason you wanted to load up an image that was stored on your actual iPhone, for example. So in other words, you want to transmit the image from the phone to the actual watch. And to do that, it's really not recommended if it's like a normal asset like we demonstrated here. So we have our stars. These we're using in our app. But if for whatever reason, so say, I don't know, there's a user-generated image on the phone they want to show on their watch. So how would we do that? Well, it would look something like this. So let's take a look at my image, my extension images. Right, so before we were in our WatchKit app images, so loading it and storing it directly in the app. This one would store it basically on the phone and transmit it wirelessly to the watch. So what I'm going to do is show you that it's a little bit different in order to get those images to display. So first of all, I'm going to go to my assets here for my extension, right, my WatchKit extension. You can see there's one for complication with a couple options here, right, circular, modular, utilitarian. We're not really going to be touching those. What I will do is I'll bring in another image, and basically I just renamed one of my star images. So instead of star 0 at 2x.png, I'm just calling it star.png. Right, so a little different file name so that we can just bring it in as an asset here. And you know what, I'm going to set it to 2x as well. So now this asset is available, and you might think you may be able to put it in the same way, but actually you can't. You have to basically do a little bit of extra legwork to get it to display. So to show you what I mean by that, let's add an image object here, and we'll add it into our existing interface. Okay, go to our code, and let's bring this object in as an outlet. So my image, for example. Okay, there it is. And now, unlike before, we can't just do my image dot set image named, and if we try to do this, it won't accept it. So just to show you, it's not going to display anything, but just to be sure, let's always work it up in the simulator. And you have to basically define it as a UI image first, and then pass that UI image into my image dot set image. Right, so here it's going to load, and yeah, we don't see the star anywhere. It didn't load, so it just kind of failed silently to load. So all we need to do is take that extra step, and we will just declare it like so. Let my extension image equal, and we just define it as a UI image. And what's the image? Well, it's named a string that is star with 2 R's, right? And then instead of set image named star, we just say my image dot set image, and the second option here, you see it takes in a UI image. So unlike set image named, where it takes a string, we're just passing it in a UI image, and we're passing it my external image, or my extension image. Right, so this will allow it to show up, and I don't think it's going to be pretty, but this will basically allow it to load on our app. So whenever you are loading in images from the extension, you just have to make sure you kind of take this extra step. And we'll wait for it to load. And also keeping in mind, this would be transmitted wirelessly from your phone to your app. So you're probably going to want to have a really small image, or at least compress it in some way. But this is how you get it to display. Right? And then we still have our other functionality, and we just kind of place it in the group, and that's why it's kind of up here in the upper left.